Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, we have an amazing guest that is making significant impact to leaders, quite frankly, all over the world. He serves as the CEO of all John Maxwell companies and has more than 25 years of leadership and team development experience, which I believe uniquely qualifies him to have a very integral role and be a champion of the John C. Maxwell brand. He's committed to adding value to individual leaders and leadership teams. He has certainly been somebody in my life that has offered great leadership nuggets, entrepreneurial nuggets. This is a gentleman that has led companies through economic challenges, pandemics, growth barriers, and disconnected team dynamics. A guy that you could say has walked it out. He's worked more closely with John than anyone else in the world. And he brings John's exclusive content to leaders all over the world. And I am so excited to have him on the show today for you all. Mark Cole, welcome to the show, my friend. I have been so excited to have you.
Jeff, I've been excited too, and hello to you, but mostly hello to the people that call you a mentor, a guide. Every one of you that's listening to this podcast, I know why you're listening to it. Because I've been impacted by Jeff. I've been stretched by Jeff. My leadership has been improved by Jeff. In fact, I remember, Jeff, when we were ideating and creating off of your book, and I went, this has got to get out. So you know what my first question, podcast family, podcast listeners, was today? Jeff, when are we getting the book? I cannot wait. And so, Jeff, I'm glad to be with you today. Talking leadership with leaders is my favorite thing. So glad to be here with you today.
Man, it's so exciting. And I don't even know if I shared this with you, Mark, but I talked to Jared about it. We did get the approval on the launch date, June 17th. So we're excited about it. And you were in the room for the whole thing. So very excited. Hey, you know what the podcast audience probably doesn't know, which is a great time to tell them, is Mark Cole was the one. I would say it's tentative, but he is the one that came up with the idea for the book title. And the book title we're thinking is going to be Firm Feedback in a Fragile World, but that might be the tagline, but neither here nor there. We're excited to get the book launched and be under your covering and the Maxwell covering to get the book to the world.
Hey, unlike John Maxwell, who when people give him an idea, he says, hey, I'll give you credit, but I won't give you royalty. Jeff, you don't have to give me credit or royalty. Just get the book out because I need it. We all need that concept of helping give healthy feedback in an unhealthy world. So I love it, man.
Yeah, man, it is so exciting. Well, hey, look, Mark, we got a lot to uncover. Your journey is quite amazing. I've heard you tell your story. But maybe not everybody that's listening has heard it. Most people recognize you as the CEO of the John Maxwell Company, which is a great title and a great honor to carry. But what a lot of people may not know is that you didn't start as the CEO. John didn't just find you off the street and you had a nice resume, right? You started by making cold calls in the call center long before you were the CEO. And I think it goes without saying that there's people listening that they desire to have this big impact and advance their careers and have more influence. Can you share some advice on how you navigated from call center to CEO of one of the greatest impactful leaders on planet Earth? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so the story is even worse than Jeff is giving because I was 30 years of age. So I had a little bit of life, even a little bit of success leading in another environment. I was quite a fish in a very small pond in my 20s and just really blowing and going and had lost my way as a leader. It's interesting because the first John Maxwell book that I read was at 18, Developing the Leader Within You. Mm-hmm. And Jeff, that book opened up my understanding to the world of leadership. Now, I already knew I loved to tell people what to do. I knew that at 5 years of age. I knew at about 5 or 6 that I loved not only telling people what to do, I loved it when they did what I said. I'm the baby of 5, and so when I could influence my older siblings, I knew there was a sense of fulfillment there. But in my 20s, I really lost my way of developing the leader on the inside, and I spent all of this time developing the leader on the outside. The things that people could see, I spent all my time developing. The things that people could not see, I spent no time developing. And so at 29 years of age, I found myself literally broken in every key area, every key bucket of my life. I was broke financially. I was broke relationally. I was broke spiritually. Every area, I was bankrupt. So I came to this company called John Maxwell. I didn't even know he was in my hometown. I didn't know his company was in my town. And somebody referred me in and said, hey, Mark, you ought to try that. Jeff, I used 3 references on my resume to get in. They wouldn't call one because it was my brother. They called another that was my childhood friend from 5 years of age. And to be honest with you, he asked them to hire me because he was also my landlord and he wanted me to pay rent. And then they called one other person that I thought would give me a great reference. And Jeff, they gave me a terrible reference. I didn't even know.
Wow.
They still gave me a chance to come in as entry level. And so when I say I came in with nothing at 30 years of age, I had 2 pieces of baggage. You know how leaders, how people, they make vows, they make commitments. I had 2 pieces of luggage. One, that I would never take a leadership position again. Leadership had burned me. Leadership, leading people had exhausted me, and my inability to develop myself had depleted all hunger to lead. The second piece of luggage was I would never let anybody get close to me because a very significant relationship had disappointed me and had frustrated me. And so I started with John Maxwell's company at the time was called Enjoy. I started literally, I say, with no references besides my friend, my landlord that wanted me to get a job, and 2 pieces of luggage. I'll never lead, working for a leadership development company.
Right.
And I'll never let anybody close to me. John Maxwell's Mr. Relationship. And it's so interesting because you asked 2 questions there. You said, tell us a little bit of your story, and I'll start from there and be a lot quicker. But tell me what it took along the journey. And I'll tell you, without question, the single-handed thing that has made the biggest difference for me is a question my leader asked me in the first week I started working with John Maxwell. Here was his question. What's your growth plan? How are you personally growing? And Jeff, unlike you, because I've been around you, you're Mr. Intentional. You're Mr. Plan. You've got a plan and you're working everybody with that plan. That's why we all listen to your podcast. I love to grow. I love to read. I love to let people speak into my life, but I had no intentionality in my life. That's why I ended up broken inside out. And so that day, 1 week into working with John in May of the year 2000, I made a decision that I was going to get an intentional growth plan for my life. And every year, I get very serious about what I want to accomplish in the next year, what I learned from the previous year, and how I'm going to take those lessons and accomplish what I want to accomplish in the next year. I call it my life plan. That single-handedly took me over the course of 10 years. It took me from the stock room, which is literally where I was making my telesale calls. It took me from there to where 10 years after I started with John, I was invited to be the CEO of our then 3 companies. Now, it was 3 companies. Our gross revenue with the 3 companies then, is not even the gross revenues of one of our 7 companies now. So we took 3 companies in the year 2010, and now in 2024 we have 7 companies, and all of them individually have a greater revenue than the 3 companies together. It's been a fun journey. It took me 10 positions to learn how to lead at this level. They kept trying to find stuff for me to do, and so it was in 2010, John asked me to take over the CEO role. And it's just been an incredible journey, a great opportunity. So I promise you, podcast listener, I've led where you're leading. I have resided in an organization wherever you are, because now I happen to, my 10th promotion was John asking me to take over ownership of all of our for-profit companies. And so we did that in the year 2020. So literally from owner, entrepreneur to entry level, tote John Maxwell's bags. I've been where you are, and I can tell you this, where you are is not where you're going to be when you access people like Jeff.
Man, you know what's so powerful in that is this concept of we can't even dream big enough to where we're
Yeah.
going. Like, I
Isn't that
can't
true?
imagine you in the call center with your scripts on your cube or whatever and thinking, someday I'm going to be the CEO. Like, I can't imagine that was a thought. It was like, let's just close some more sales and hit the quota this month or whatever it might be. But, you know, being great at telesales, I'm assuming, opened the door to the next thing. And
Yeah.
being great at the next thing opened the door to the next thing. And I want to run this by you, Mark, because what I have found, and even in my own career in the corporate world, was my results got me so far. But then what I realized was the pool really thinned, and everybody in my sphere had great results. And then there were certain things that you had to do differently to get noticed and get advanced, because then you're around greatness, if you will.
Yeah.
What were some of those things that you think, and I know I'm going to ask you to take off the humility hat here, which I know is not, easy for you, but I think it's going to serve people. When you got to this level that results alone weren't enough anymore, that there had to be these unique soft skills, leadership skills, change management, what were some of the things that you think stood out to you? Because I got to imagine you weren't the only one in the organization that wanted the promotion. There were probably others that were even disappointed that you got it over them. What were some of those things?
Yeah, and so you're right. It was about 3 years in. I told you part of my story is I came here with a piece of baggage that says I'll never lead again. And so for 3 years, all of my sales performance, all of those things gave me invitation to lead or to influence at a different level. And I said, no, thank you. I'm very happy right here. The reason I say that is because it's very important, your environment. So the first word I gave you is intentionality. I got from the corner room to the stock room, or from the stock room to the corner office with intentionality. It was an intentional plan. 3 years into this organization, I looked and said, one day, over the next 12 years, I want to be the owner of John Maxwell's organization. Intentionality got me to a place to where I was believable to myself. The next step was environment. Who are you allowing to speak into your life on the journey that you're on? You see, by being in a good environment like this one, the company that I now get to lead, being in environments like this podcast that Jeff gives to you, begins to cause you to see things you could not have seen without the voice, the influence of others. So I could have had all the intentionality in the world. Intentionality in doing better what you did yesterday will get you incremental growth, but it takes a different environment to get you exponential growth. You can't think differently if you keep talking to the same people. You can't. You're going to keep talking the same way. You'll talk better. You'll incrementally get better. You'll start thinking a little bit better, but you won't think exponentially until you start exposing yourself to people that think at a whole different level. And so while intentionality got me and continues to get me further along, environment gets me exponentially further along. The final thing that I would tell you is relationships. So I talked about environment, what you put into you, who you put yourself around to you. But I learned early on, and this would be, I learned to do this better, but this was a gift I was given for certain as a teenager. I could walk into a room and I could know who the influences were. Jeff, I remember when I walked into one room with you, you're very successful, you were speaking, you're doing a lot of stuff, but in that room, you were just one of some people. And you were trying to win the right to present your book and to get Maxwell Leadership imprint on it. And I remember watching you walk that room and work that room without anybody knowing how intentional you were at knowing and walking that room. Because I walk into rooms and I notice the abstract. I pay attention to the behind the scenes. John Maxwell says it like this: when you're in the room and somebody speaks, watch the eyes of everybody else in the room. And if they go to the person speaking or if they go to another person, you will quickly know the influencer in the room by watching the eyes of the room. So the art of leadership is what I'm talking about now, not the science of leadership, not helping with growth plans and all that. There is an art in watching how rooms move and watching how who holds the influence in the room. And so in about 2004, so I'm 4 or 5 years into working on John's team, I started noticing that all of the CEOs, not CEOs, all the presidents of John's companies would see Linda Eggers, John Maxwell's assistant, as a problem. They would talk about it in closed rooms. They'd talk about it in leisure. Well, we got to get through Linda. We got to get through Linda. And I went, wow, if I can get Linda to be on my side, I bet you John Maxwell will start noticing me more because Linda notices me. And so very early on, people that saw John Maxwell's systems or John Maxwell's inner circle as problematic to not get to the relationship of John Maxwell, I saw as my advocate.
Wow.
They were not my adversary. They were my advocate. I say this all the time. We have 53,000 certified coaches in 169 countries. I tell every one of our coaches when they come in for their first session, they all come to Orlando at least once, many of them multiple times. And I say, guys, let me tell you this right here. I stand today not because John Maxwell noticed me as a good leader. I stand here today because Linda Eggers noticed me as a good leader, and she told John Maxwell I needed to get the next hire, the next advancement, the next promotion. Knowing who holds the reins of influence in an organization gives you an inside track on what's important to the organization so that what's important to the organization becomes important to you so that you produce what's important to the organization and get greater opportunity.
Man, this is career warfare right here. This is the stuff that's really hard to teach. You know, we hear John talk a lot about leadership often is better caught than taught, right?
Yeah.
And the listener is catching the journey. You know, these are things like this is stuff that's tough to teach in a workshop, right? But thinking about these are the soft skills that transcend the results, because at some point the results aren't going to be enough. You can only win so many trophies and be at the top of the stack rankings because everybody else is at that level too. And these soft skills, and I will tell you this tip that Mark gave in regards to watching the room, I had never have heard it presented that way. And I'm going to be watching for this. And that is just tremendous feedback. I love it. Absolutely.
Thank you. You know, it's funny you do it though, Jeff, and most leaders do intuitively do it. It's when they make it intentional or they put it into science is when it becomes predictable and scalable. Okay? So you intuitively do it. Let me tell you what you did. We had a wonderful, wonderful kind of a Shark Tank environment when I saw Jeff really shine. It wasn't the first time because I knew of you, Jeff, but it was the first time we were in a room in an environment like this. And of all the sharks, I've been around John Maxwell, a lot of books. And so I had some real things to contribute to the room. Everybody did, but I had this unique thing to contribute. And I watched you notice that in the first 3 or 4 presentations. So when you came up to your presentation, intuitively, you sent a lot of those thoughts to the corporate leader that had publishing imprint, that you had publishing things to do, that you knew had an inside track to the world of publishing, and you made your presentation relevant to the way the room was responding to the sharks. Now, I remember that distinctly right here because I watched the room. And so while you haven't heard it said like that, I guarantee you somebody like you that already is intuitively does that, now will put a system around that, and you'll scale your influence in the next room you're in.
Man, that's powerful. Influence is everything, right?
It is. It
really is an impact. And influence opens the opportunity to showcase your gift, really.
That's right.
I mean, I think so.
Well said.
You know, I wanted to ask this question because I talk a lot about it on the show, is the importance of mentorship. And in essence, that's what you were talking about, is getting around the right people, the relationships. And I often find, even a lot of times, I would say the best mentors aren't inside your organization. They're outside so that you can bring fresh ideas into the organization. when I talk about this, and I talk about it till I'm blue in the face, the value of mentoring, it's my battle cry. It's why I am who I am today. The one question I get from people, Mark, is, Jeff, love the concept, believe in the concept. I don't even know where to begin. How do I go about getting a mentor? So my question, Mark, would be is like, what would you say to the listener that's like, I know I need a mentor, but I don't know where to begin? What do I say to them once I identify them? How do I get that thing going? Like, how have you done that throughout your life?
Well, early on, I've given you my story. I was broke. I had literally no money to pay anybody. But I had a little bit of experience. And so I can remember in my first year, my first growth plan, Jeff, podcast listeners, viewers, my first growth plan was the 12 books I was going to read that year. It was the 3 experiences that I was going to go to learn in that year. And then the 5 people I was going to ask to mentor me, to speak into my life. Nobody wanted to have a conversation with me. I was a no-name. So not only did they not know how messed up I had become as a leader in my 20s, I was entry level, nothing to offer from their perspective in my new environment. So how does a person like that get mentors except buy it? Only I got a problem. I'm broke. So what I did, I remember, I'm 30 years old. I humbled myself and I started asking the 21 and 22-year-old interns in our company if they would spend lunch with me. Bring your own lunch, because I can't take you and buy you lunch. Bring your own lunch. And would you talk with me about how you're learning in your college, in your experience environment? Now, I had led budgets bigger than the leaders that were leading 5 levels above me. I had 1 leader, the 2nd leader, 3rd leader, 4th leader. The 5th leader was the president of the company, and then they reported to John. I had led budgets bigger than the 5 people above me. But I said, they're not going to give me any time. They see me as an entry-level telesales guy. I went to people that would at least give me an hour of their time over lunch that we brought, and I brought a list of questions for them. Well, what happened at that point, well, nobody was asking me to mentor them, but what happened is I began to ask them questions and give them thoughts. They went, whoa, I just had lunch with Mark and he asked me questions, but I learned more from his questions. And then people began to want to ask me to go to lunch. And so I would find 5 people early on in my career that were much less perceived experience than me. And I would ask them if I could take them to lunch, or early on if they would bring their own lunch and we could ask questions. Today, what I do right now, Jeff, I have access to a lot of people that would just spend time with me. This year, a guy that loves me, appreciates me, has led huge organizations, has led a national brand, has told me anytime he would spend time with me. And I said, no, I'm going to pay you this year more than anybody's ever paid you to be my coach. He said, no, you're not. I'm on your nonprofit board. You're not paying me. This is my gift back to the nonprofit. I said, no, I'm paying you because I want you to sweat before you come and meet with me, because I need you to bring your A game. Now, I spend massive amounts of money to get mentorship, to get coaching. But no matter if you're at the scale where you're asking interns 10 years your junior, or whether you're now this year spending more than you've ever paid, you need to have intentionality on getting somebody to speak into your life as if you're the learner, you're the student. Because asking someone to speak into you gives them a responsibility to bring content and gives you a responsibility to humble yourself to hear a lesson. And that's the value of mentorship.
Talk about the stirring up of stagnation, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's it. And I love what you said is oftentimes I think we think mentoring has to be like somebody that's further ahead.
Right.
But we can learn from anybody. And, I was speaking to a group yesterday about the power of mentorship. I don't even know if you know this story, Mark, but our mutual friend, Tim Elmore, I invited him on the show. Guys like Tim are hard to get a hold of, but he was launching a book and, he wanted to promote the book. So he came on my show. We talked for 20 minutes after the show ended, and I just asked him one question. I said, if I'm ever in the Georgia area where you are, would you consider coffee or lunch? He said, yeah. Anytime you're in the area, get with Melissa. I said, that's so fortunate because I'm going to be in the area soon. And I got with Melissa, and I'm sitting there with lunch with Tim. And he said, what brought you to the area? And I said, lunch with you.
That's
And
great.
I had 7 questions. And one of the questions was, what can I do more to promote my brand? And he said, you got to write a book. And it got me on an application into the, and here we are. I'm launching a book with the John Maxwell tag on it. Like, who would have
Wow.
ever thought, right? This is the power of mentoring. And I love your story there. Love
That's
it.
a beautiful story. Man, I love that story.
Unbelievable. If you would have told me 5 years ago Tim Elmore was going to be one of my mentors, I would have told you were out of your mind. But here we are. Like, I have a cell phone. Like,
That's
it blows my
beautiful.
mind, right? But here we are. And man, there's so much power in it. And I just wanted I wanted the listener to hear it from you, that you didn't just get dropped off at the CEO, corner
Yeah.
office. Like, there's a journey, and people help you get there.
That's so well said. That's so well said. And John asks this question often. Who do you know that I should know? What his introduction to John Wooden was based off of that question. One day, he asked somebody, "Who do you know that I know?" And the guy said, "Well, I think you would like to meet a guy named John Wooden that I spend time with." John went, "Like the John Wooden?" "Yeah, I think I would like to." And once, just like you said, I'm coming to the area. "Oh, really? What you coming to the airport?" "To meet you."
Yeah.
And so that's a great, great illustration, not only on the power of mentorship and recognize it, but on the persistency of always looking for a way to find those top-notch mentors.
Man, it's powerful. Changed my life. Absolutely
Yeah.
has changed my life. This next question for you, Mark, is probably just for me and nobody else. But I got to know. We know your role. Your work precedes you. But I want to quote something I heard John say once. He said that you were the best number 2 he's ever had.
Wow.
And we live in a world where everybody wants to be number 1. They want to be out front. They want to be at the tip of the spear. They want to have the spotlight. Can you talk about how you have created such joy that comes from being a number 2, and how you've done that so gracefully, and how it is literally put you in your strength zone? Can you talk to the number 2, 3, 4 and talk about what it means to serve the number 1?
Yeah, yes, I will. And thank you for that. And every time I hear John say that, or I hear it quoted, I'm extremely humbled, because I know many of the number 2s. They were bosses of mine. They were people that developed me and cultivated me. And so it's always humbling. I take that with a great sense of accomplishment, and, to be honest with you, however righteous pride can be, with a great deal of pride, because I've worked hard for that to be said.
Yeah, for sure.
But let me kind of dispel some. Speaking of books, I'm writing a book on being a number 2. Lead me, follow me. I'm right behind you. And so, how number 2 really is only a state of mind in a falsified hierarchy anyway, because we teach leadership is not position, and yet it's not hierarchy, and yet it's not valuing somebody more than another. John says often, you don't work for me, you work with me. And yet I am very clear a number 2 to John. But I'll say this, and I'm not trying to mystify it. I promise you I'm not. I'm going to write a book to demystify it, in fact. But I'm really not a number 2 in my mind. I'm a number 1. I'm like a really good number 1, because I'm a type A personality. I'm got drive like crazy. And that didn't just happen when I became owner, when John started saying, be my CEO. Man, I've been a number 1 even when I didn't have anything. Because I never give away control of how effective I am to anyone. I keep control of that. That makes me always a number 1. John would never see himself as the number one, so he gets a lot of credit for being a good number two because he always empowers me as if I'm the best thing ever. Yeah. It's only in context of helping other people understand ones and twos that we do that. Because let me tell you this, I'm now the owner of the companies. I still report to people. I own it. I still report to people. Number one, I report to my wife. She is the chairman of my personal advisory council.
Right on.
And she serves that role of chairman quite well. Anytime that you are the man or a self-made leader or answerable to no one, you are in trouble. So always make sure you're number two, even when everybody else thinks you're number one. So number one, I dealt with a number two mentality is really, I'm never a number two, I'm a number one. As a number one, never see yourself as number one, you're number two. Now, I mystified some things, but for the sake of time, just know that's really a mindset thing that you have to be aware of. Let's talk about what you're really talking about, and that is, how do you be effective when you're working for a dynamic personality like John, perhaps, or like I mean, even really even like you? How do we do that, Jeff? Is really what we're asking, or for somebody that reports to me as a number two.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you 3 things that I think will help those 2, 3s, and 4s out there. Number one is I want you to own the role you're serving in. Own it. Become the best at it. Don't allow a sequence in a hierarchy to stop you from being the very best. My dad used to say all the time, it's one of my favorite quotes that he gave me, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing with excellence. If it's
Absolutely.
worth doing, it's worth doing with passion. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing with a flair. And I would love when my dad would say that. I'd say, yeah, it's with passion, it's with flair, it's with excellence. Here's the point. I want to have it said of me, I'm the best at whatever I am. To illustrate that, when my daughter was in grade school, I would take her to school when I was in town, and every Tuesday I would get behind the trash truck. And it would drive me crazy, Jeff. It would drive me crazy. Until one day I quit getting frustrated being around the trash truck, and I started watching how Frank collected trash. Now, it was a very, very big day, a big road. So it was dangerous. Cars were zooming, and he was going from one side of the street to the other. And when he would stop somebody up and they would hang, he'd forgive, he'd be apologetic. He had such a flair at collecting trash that Frank caught my attention, and I began to tell Macy, look at how this guy's doing that. Now, I didn't know his name was Frank, but notice I now know his name was Frank because one day I had to pull over and I said, Frank, you got to tell me something. How did you get so good at trash collecting? He said, oh, that's easy. Number one, he gave me his name. He said, my dad always told me, no matter what I did, become a pro. I went, that sounds a little bit like what my dad said.
Yeah.
And I said, Frank, you have become so excellent at trash collecting. I'll be honest with you, there are days I want to just stand on the back of a truck and collect trash rather than go deal with trash in my office job. You are such a pro. Frank said, my dad would be proud, wouldn't he? I said, Frank, your dad would be ecstatic. You're the best trash collector I've ever gotten.
Wow.
Now, I'm still telling Frank's story. My daughter's in first year of college. I'm still telling Frank's story 10 years later. Why? Because Frank said, I don't care what you think my job is to be a pro at whatever I do.
Yes.
So number 2s, 3s, 4s, be a pro at number 2. Have it your sights that John Maxwell, that Jeff, that whoever says they're the best number whatever that they could be.
Yeah.
The second thing that I would offer to you is to always be growing in your trade or your craft. Never be satisfied with number 2. I'm constantly asking the question, John, what can I take off your plate? What can number 2 be doing in this environment that number 1s would be doing in every other environment? You know what that did for me? That prepared me to be a number 1 one day that'll be better than any number 1 I ever would have been if I hadn't started being number one with number 2 job. I know how to be number 2 because I was always asking number 1, is there anything I can take off your plate?
Wow.
always be challenging yourself to think bigger than your current reality. And then number 3, I could talk about this all day.
And you
Number
could.
3 is never get confused on whose agenda wins. Excuse me. What that means to me is I'm a number 1 in my fierceness, in my competitiveness, in my desire to grow. But when I realized that I would be a number 2 to John Maxwell, I quickly let go of my agenda and made his agenda my agenda. I don't have an agenda if it's not on John Maxwell's agenda. I can't do that as a number 2. Too many number 2s flame out before they ever get to be a number 1 because they wanted to keep their number 1 agenda and they had a number 2 position. You don't get a number 1 agenda until you're given number 1. And I've watched too many leaders not ever get to number 1 when they should have been number 1 because they were not a very good number 2. And you got to be a great number 2 before you can be a number 1.
Yeah.
So how did I do that? I constantly ask, John, what's important to you today? Hey, John, what kept you up last night? John, what's on your mind today? What exciting thing do you want us to accomplish? Hey, John, what's important? What numbers do you want to know about? I constantly paid attention with questions and observations on what was important to the number 1. Therefore, his agenda became my agenda. But let me tell you what happens over time. My agenda dies, his agenda becomes my agenda, but eventually his agenda becomes our agenda. And I got to be honest with you, about 8 years ago, I noticed something very interesting. It went from John's agenda became my agenda to John's agenda became our agenda to my agenda became John's agenda.
Wow.
John began asking me questions. What do you think I should do here? Over the last 14 years as CEO of John Maxwell's companies, I can honestly say this, John would verify it. 97% of the decisions made and the visions created have been mine that John just up-leveled. He would say that because he so empowered me to do what he only can do so that I can do what only I can do. And now we're like, who's 1 and who's 2? Well, everybody thinks you're number 1, John. And of course, in the world of writing and speaking and all that, that's not even what we're talking about. We're talking about running his companies.
Sure.
It very quickly became who's the 1 and who's the 2 because our agenda, my agenda became our agenda.
Well, I mean, I've been in the business world a long time, and I'm looking from the outside in, right? But I don't know any 2 people that have done it better. It's truly, it's rare, I would say. It's very rare because it requires humility. It requires preferring someone over yourself, which are all against human nature oftentimes. And so I know that that is going to absolutely speak to people because it's one of those things that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But, you know, I loved what you said about I didn't have an agenda. My agenda was his agenda. This is a life of service. And by the way, like being number 2 under John Maxwell isn't a bad life.
That's a pretty good life.
That's a pretty good life. I mean, you're around Mr. Dynamic and Mr. You know, relationship and influencer. It's not a bad life. But so many people, I think, mess it up and get it wrong and let greed or selfishness or whatever come into play. There's a reason that you've done so well with that, Mark. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Man, you've spent probably more time with John than anybody on the planet.
Yeah.
You guys are all over the world. You've sat and listened to him talk numerous times. You could probably finish his sentences, and this might be a tough question to ask, but I think the world wants to know. What's the most valuable lesson that you've learned from working with John directly and intimately like you have?
It's such a great question, and I have found through the years, because of my proximity to John, it's funny that you say I travel around the world. Margaret, his wife, calls me the other woman. Because I travel with him all the time. I'm with him all the time. And she says, hey, Mark travels with you more than I do. We are together quite a bit. Truly the answer to that is a little more situational than I would like, because it's depending on what I'm interacting with and what I'm struggling with, to where I go back and draw from something that I've got. But I can give you the top three. Number one is the intentionality of growth. I've talked a lot about that, so I won't talk any more time of that, except at 77, I would tell you that John has taught me that growth is infinite. There is no destination to growth. It's an infinite game. And he's truly learning more at 77 right now than he's ever learned before. And so I continue to learn the importance of an infinite growth mindset. The second thing that I've learned from John is the necessity of being comfortable in one's own skin. How to not take yourself so seriously. You have got to settle who you are and be. You've got to, as a leader. One of the greatest detractions of a leader, outside of the biggest attribute that I look at in hiring somebody on our team at the executive level, is their appetite to grow, their coachability, their teachability. Hands down, that's the biggest attribute I'm looking for. It goes back to one. The second thing that I would tell you that will destroy great skills and strengths is the insecurities of a leader. It's when they operate out of that insecurity and they take themselves too seriously. John says this often. I love it when he says this: hey, leaders, start laughing at yourself. Everybody else is. They know our idiosyncrasies more than we know them. So when they come clear to you, admit them in front of people, and they'll finally go, phew, finally he or she knows. We don't have to tell him. He or she has found out the bad news. He struggles there, right there. Right. That is the other thing that I would tell you that I've learned from John is, so be comfortable in your own skin, because insecurities will kill you. Mm-hmm. And the third thing that I would tell you is your greatest gifts also create your greatest blind spots. Because when you're gifted with something, you don't realize the downside of that. Liz Wiseman wrote a book about maximizers, things that are a leader's very good at. On the opposite side of a gift, a strength that you maximize, is a minimizer. It's where it becomes ineffective on the other side. We call it with John the Maxwell hammer. When John has an idea and he doesn't think anybody gets it, he keeps pounding the idea, and we're all sitting there going, we got it. Mine is intensity. I am a passionate person. It's one of my top 5. You can hear with my voice. You can hear with my body language. I just want to come through the screen and sit in there with you, Jeff. I mean, my passion is there. The other side of passion is intensity. And often I lose the effectiveness of passion because it's felt as intensity. And so that leads me to this third thing, and that is every leader has blind spots. Yeah. And Jeff, you know the challenge with blind spots? They're blind. You can't see them. You can't see them with a smoke signal. You can't see them with a telegraph machine. You can't see them when the plane on the roof, on the sky, puts it in a smoke cloud. They're blind. You have to bring people into your life that you trust enough that they will call out your blind spots, because you can't see your blind spots until you have been shown it over and over and over again. And once again, a killer to great leaders is when they don't become aware and become coachable in their blind areas.
That's powerful. And it takes a lot of leaders out. You know, I would say even the most successful leaders, because they don't have ears, because they're at the top. And, you know, John talks about this in the book, The 5 Levels of Leadership. Yep. You know, at level 5, he talks about the blind spots. You create the press, you might start believing it. Yep. And it's so true. And this is fantastic advice. Do you have time for 2 questions and a couple speed round? All right.
I do.
Because these are I look, truth be told, audience, I came up with these questions not for you, but for me. But I think we can all benefit from them, because I've been dying for this interview. But in your experience, And again, this could be a hard one because it's situational, but what's the single most impactful thing that a leader can do to positively influence the team that they lead? If you had to narrow it down, and there's a lot of things, right? But
Yeah.
what's that thing that you would tell the leader listening, like, just don't miss this one. It's going to give you your biggest return. What do you think that it might be?
It's empathy, not sympathy, but it's empathy. You cannot take a leader where you want them to go. You can't take a team member where you want them to go if you don't go where they are first. Too many leaders are travel guides. They tell people to go where they've never been, rather than they're travel guides rather than tour guides. A travel guide takes you, a tour guide goes with you. And a tour guide will have to go where the people are to then take them where the destination really is desired. And when leaders operate as a tour guide, a travel guide, they never get the results because they don't empathize with where the people are. I've watched great leaders with great vision and great excitement and great momentum lose that momentum because they're leading from what they can see rather than what the team can see. And here's the point. Leadership is about seeing more and before. In fact, if you're in a room and somebody's seeing more and before you, you're not the leader, they are. So a leader has to see more and before, and yet oftentimes they lead from what they can see rather than what the team can see. And they don't take people with them. And they wonder, why is turnover so bad? They wonder why burnout is so bad. It's because you're leading from what you see rather than leading from what they see. So that would be the greatest thing, is empathize. Go and get in the shoes of your people so you can take them to the views that you see.
I don't know if you can remember the quote that you said, but if you can and could say it one more time, it was something like, you can't go where you haven't been, or you haven't been where they were.
A tour guide tells people where to go that they've never been. Sorry, a travel agent. I'll get this right now. A travel agent tells people where to go and they've never been. A tour guide takes you with them to where you want them to go. And as a leader, stop being a travel agent and start being a tour guide. Stop
so
telling
good.
people to go where you've seen but you haven't been. Start taking them on a journey so that you can go together.
Man, that's beautiful. Beautiful. And that's a whole workshop in itself. But
Yeah,
wow.
it is.
That is unbelievable. Mark, how do you look? You're at the cutting edge of where are we going? Where is society? Where is the economy? How can we serve leaders better? So on and so forth. How do you see the role of leadership evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
It's a great question, and it's one that I'm wrestling with. And so while I did not necessarily anticipate the question, it's one that I am fully immersed in. I've been with John now for 2.5 decades, for 25 years next May. John was doing this 25 years before I was with him, and he was mentoring me from afar. He didn't know me. I wasn't on his team. In John's lifetime, leadership has transitioned from management. That's where it was when John first started. There was only management books, Peter Drucker and others. John began to write leadership, and then leadership with another dimension, which was serving others. So it wasn't top-down leadership, it was bottom-up lifting leadership. How can I serve you? That wasn't the way it was at first. It was management, then leadership, positional leadership, then relational leadership. How do I help you get where you want to go? I think in the last decade, we've probably evolved to more of a team leadership. But I have found that now we're starting to go to cause leadership. The leader's ability and credibility to address the cause that the team feels like that they're needing to solve is going to help us lead this now generation of up-and-coming leaders. The kids that are coming out of college now, they are so cause-oriented that you're not going to incentivize them with days off. You're not going to incentivize them with great pay packages. You're going to incentivize them with the significance or the meaning behind the vision of the organization. That's why you're seeing companies like Delta Airlines and others come out with community initiatives. It's not just out of the goodness of their heart, although there's a lot of good-hearted leaders. It's because that's the way they're attracting today's talent is by saying, hey, we fly a great airline, we do great things, but let me tell you the cause that we're doing. And so they're getting very vested in politically polarizing things like climate and other things because that is scratching the edge. So we went from management to leadership to servant leadership to team leadership to cause leadership. What's the bigger purpose behind the organization? We've been challenged by people like Simon Sinek to know our personal why.
Right.
We're going to have to know our organizational why, and it's going to have to be stronger than a great bottom line.
That's powerful. Purpose driven.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing that generationally a little bit as well.
We are.
That's a great problem for us all to solve and to be looking forward to, right? Our friend Tim talks a little bit about that in generational diversity.
That's right.
He touches on some of that, which is powerful. All right, last but not least, the speed round. You can be quick with your answers.
Okay.
If you'd
I'll
like.
be quick.
Morning or night person?
Morning.
All right. A skill that you're working on right now?
Listening. I feel like leaders are talking way too much and not listening enough, and therefore they're talking irrelevantly. They're tone deaf, and so listening is a huge art that I'm doing right now, and that's by asking questions.
That's fantastic. What's your favorite way to decompress after a long, tough day?
So it's just a long, meaningful conversation. My wife is the recipient of that most of the time. We're heavily involved in our grandkids right now, so whether it's wife or a close friend, just decompressing by a meaningful conversation of the significance of the day is my way. It's not golf, by the way. Golf stresses me out because I think I'm supposed to be as good as Tiger Woods, and I'm not.
Yeah, you too competitive to even play the
I'm too
game,
competitive.
right?
Too
Right.
competitive.
What's one non-negotiable in your daily routine?
It is the power of planning the one moment I have to be at the top of my game. So I start every morning and I go, Mark, what is the one moment you've got to have everything focused to be successful? And a lot of times that's a meeting, sometimes that's a conversation, sometimes that is a thought time that I have set aside, but I identify at the beginning of every day, how am I and where am I going to be at the peak performance?
Wow. This was that time for me, just so you know.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Last speed round. You're sitting on a bench, you're overlooking a beautiful lake, and you can spend 30 minutes having deep conversation with anybody you want, dead or alive. Who would it be?
Abraham Lincoln.
Wow.
I want to know why and how he took diverse people, put them into his cabinet so he could solve a separated nation. Because our nation, our people, leadership is so divided now, and Abraham Lincoln somehow brought different opinions, different people, different racial tensions, brought it together and gave us a solution that's still given back today, and I would love to know how he did it.
Unbelievable, profound, so profound. There's a lot you could promote because the work of John Maxwell and your organization has changed my life and many of our listeners. But what a lot of the listeners might not know of, they know about my book, they know that it's coming, but can you just take a minute and tell the listener, that aspiring author, maybe a little bit about John Maxwell Publishing and your vision around that?
Yeah, I want to take incredibly gifted people like Jeff. You all know Jeff, so he's the best example for you to give. John Maxwell is another example. One day I'll have a little bit of something to say in a literary form. Is to take people with a huge appetite to impact others, with a great competence to share experiences with others, with a thought that will provoke others and get it into print, get it into training curriculum, get it into podcast, and get it out so that it impact the world. And so we took John Maxwell, he's written 90 distinct books, 130 derivatives. We've taken that name, that brand, and that idea, and we now are working with people like Jeff and others on how to get their content into literary form and other measures to make a huge difference.
And it is a blessing. It is amazing.
Excited.
Yeah, so exciting. Listener, if you're thinking about writing a book, and you should write a book, especially if you're in leadership or you're aspiring to go to a different place in your influence, you at minimum have to put Maxwell Publishing on your list of people to vet out. The experience has been great, Mark, and
Thank you.
I'm truly grateful for it. Anything else you would like to tell the audience before we break?
Hey, you're a smart audience. You don't need to hear anything else from me. Keep listening to Jeff. Keep following people like this to make a huge difference for you. And Jeff, to you and any of your podcast listeners, anything we can do to serve you on your leadership journey, on your personal growth journey, here we are. Just let us know how we can help you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, listener. And Mark, thank you again. Your deposits are priceless. And I'm personally grateful for them. And I'm excited for the show, of course, but I'm even more excited for the future and what's coming through our relationship. So we appreciate you so much. Listener, until next week, keep making big impact. Keep serving the people that are around you in every area of your influence. And always, always keep turning the pressure into potential.
The Champion Forum Podcast with Jeff Hancher. Lead, inspire, win.